Chapter 1. My Story, From Greenville to Bethlehem. Barack Obama, in a new preface to his older book Dreams from My Father, a story of race and inheritance, quotes William Faulkner to show that history is never dead. He describes the difference between the time when the book was written and the time he was writing the new preface. The book was first published in 1995, against a backdrop of Silicon Valley and a booming stock market, the collapse of the Berlin Wall, Mandela, in slow, sturdy steps emerging from prison to lead a country, the signing of peace accords in Oslo. He observed that there was a rising global optimism as writers announced the end of our fractured history, the ascendance of free markets and liberal democracy, the replacement of old hatreds and wars between nations with virtual communities and battle for market share. And then, he says, on September 11th, 2001, the world fractured. History returned that day with a vengeance. In fact, as Faulkner reminds us, the past is never dead and buried. It isn't even past. This collective history, this past, directly touches my own. Growing up in Greenville. This is true about the story of race in America. It is certainly true in relation to me. This collective history, this past, directly touches my own. I was born in 1946 in Chattanooga, Tennessee, and from the time I was 6 months old, I grew up in Greenville, South Carolina. I left for college 18 years later and spent 4 years in Wheaton, Illinois, 3 years in Pasadena, California, 3 years in Munich, Germany, and the rest of my life in the Twin Cities of Minnesota. But those early years in South Carolina are the roots of my racial burden. The population of South Carolina in 1860 was about 700,000. 60% were African Americans, 420,000. And all but 9,000 of these were slaves. That's a mere 150 years ago, only 59 years before my father was born. On December 20th, 1860, South Carolina was the first state to secede from the Union, largely in protest over Abraham Lincoln's election as an anti-slavery president and the implications that had for states' rights. 3 weeks later, the Civil War began in Charleston, South Carolina. Over 4 years later, on April 9th, 1865, the war ended with the surrender of Southern General Robert E. Lee at Appomattox Courthouse. 90 years later, when I was 9 years old in Greenville, the enforced segregation was almost absolute. Drinking fountains, public restrooms, public schools, public swimming pools, bus seating, housing, restaurants, hospital waiting rooms, dentist waiting rooms, bus station waiting rooms, and, with their own kind of enforcement, churches, including mine. I can tell you from the inside that for all the rationalized glosses, it was not separate but equal. It was not respectful. It was not just. It was not loving. And therefore it was not Christian. It was ugly and demeaning. And as we will see, because of my complicity, I have much to be sorry about. Which is one reason this book focuses so heavily on the gospel of Jesus Christ. I owe my life and hope to the gospel. Without it, I would still be strutting with racist pride, or I would be suffering the moral paralysis of white guilt. But the gospel has an answer to both pride and guilt. I hope this book makes that plain. Growing up black in Greenville. 3.5 miles across town from where I grew up, in the same city, 5 years older than I, another little boy was growing up on the other side of the racial divide. His name was Jesse Jackson. Jackson was born October 8, 1941, at his home on 20 Haney Street. When Jackson was 13, the family moved to a newly constructed housing project, Fieldcrest Village, now Jesse Jackson Townhomes, 3 miles to the east. His biographer describes the boyhood neighborhood. A dingy warren of flimsy little houses with plank porch railings ranked with rusted coffee cans that in the summer held rufflings of geraniums and caladiums.